Hey Bobcat Beat, it's Haley Rasmussen, and today we are here with Mr. Doug McBride from the hospital, Mr. Randy Lords, our assistant superintendent, and Mr. Kevin Jones from the counseling office. And we are here to talk about school shootings and what they would do in a situation as seen in Florida recently, and how it is such a problem and how it's so sad that it's happening all around the country now. So the main question that we want to address is, how are you keeping us safe? And with that, we are going to ask you a series of questions and hopefully get a gist of how you guys are going to keep us safe, the students and the teachers included. So we're going to start with the hospital.
Okay, sure.
How is a hospital prepared for a school shooting?
Okay, great question there. Can I just tell you how much I appreciate you're asking these types of questions and bringing this up, because this is a really big issue that the hospital is trained for, but we're very careful to understand what the situations are happening all the time. When you're asking a question like that, as far as how the hospital is prepared, one thing we need to understand is there's a lot of different levels that would be happening in a crisis situation such as this. If we compared it, something like what has just recently happened, dealing with that, the ER is where all of these things would be placed, upon the hospital's issues. When they would come in there, we triage patients, and then we kind of identify the level of care that needs to be taken for them. To give you kind of an idea, if we did have a situation like this, we actually have all those who are dealing with the ER area are on call all the time, meaning like if there was ever a crisis situation, we could pull in a whole team. It would allow us to be able to fill our ER. We would have all of the surgeons we need, all of our orthopedic surgeons, everybody that we would need to handle these types of crisis situations. It also gives us an ability, we have different spots within the hospital that we could actually have alternate ERs. So we could have up to 2 or 3 ERs going simultaneously. And so obviously the triage is the first place that we would be going to, pulling in whatever doctors we need to. As we hit a certain trigger point, then we get more individuals in there. So we have protocols, we have trainings for these types of situations, and so just the level of magnitude that we have depends on what area we're going to be working into.
Okay, we want to thank our doctors and nurses that are always on call. They are awesome, especially in these situations. Will there be enough employees that could handle a school shooting?
Okay, great. Appreciate that question as well. When we talk about the employees there at the hospital, again, everybody in the hospital environment is quote unquote on call all the time. So in other words, depending on the magnitude of what we have, everybody would be called into a situation like that. If we got to an area where we were overcrowded or overfull with what we could handle, we actually have access to what we call LifeFlight. You've heard of that. We actually have 2 companies that we could pull who have multiple copters that we could use. And so if we needed to send them out to other facilities, our feeder hospital, meaning a hospital if we need to do an overflow, would be Irmac in Idaho Falls. Madison County has their staffing set up as far as the emergency ambulances, and they're equipped to be able to handle that as well. So we've got a whole fleet of vehicles that we could do there as well. So do we have enough people? Yes. I mean, as far as depending on, with what we could handle within this area, we would have what we need. If not, we do have those outsources available to us.
Okay, does the hospital have security to handle the press and parents if something like this were to happen?
Yes. Again, we have certain protocols that we work into for depending on what's happening there. Our PR person, so which would be myself, would actually go to a location set up that would be secluded from other areas of the hospital or other things that are happening. We would have spaces set up for family or friends or those who are associated with the patients or individuals, the victims that were there, and we would have them in a particular area as well. So we have a press place for any information that we need to send from there, and then also for the parents or grievancy situations or any of those, we'll have those on staff as well. We work very closely with our law enforcement to help us in keeping track of what's happening. It's kind of hard to answer these types of questions because of the magnitude that there could be. So oftentimes they may be off-site, and in those situations, our backup plan is our engineering department, which is affiliated with about 10 to 12 individuals, are actually trained to handle those kind of law enforcement situations there at the hospital. So that would be kind of our second step of level there.
Okay, last question.
Sure.
What should students do if they are near someone that is injured?
Okay. Asking a question like that again has a few areas that you need to understand. in a crisis shooting situation, if there was an issue in the school district that actually is, if it's in progress. So in other words, if the active shooter is still there, you're really into a situation where you need to take care of yourself. And I know that sounds really odd when you have somebody there who may be injured, but you do not want to become part of that problem as well. And so the idea is you need to make sure that you're in a safe environment, or the safest as you can be. If you could pull an individual to safety or to an area, obviously take care of that the best that you can. But if it's after the shooter has left, or it's been taking care of the shooter or whatever, so there's no threat there, obviously the bleeding is the biggest thing. You need to make sure that you're stopping that bleeding with compressions or a pressure on those particular wounds. That's the number one thing. And then hopefully the paramedics would be there quickly that they could assist in that area. But just taking care of those simple things are the biggest things.
Thank you so much. And of course, throughout this, you can have comments as
Okay,
well.
great.
Okay, we will move to our counselor, Mr. Jones. What would be long-term effects from a school shooting?
Psychologically, of course, there would be many long-term effects. The biggest one would be a lot of stress, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder would be the most prevalent with any crisis. Anything that would be causing students to worry, to have stress, to feel anxious, to have a traumatic experience that they would not be able to necessarily process and know how to deal with those emotions. But PTSD would probably be the largest thing that you would deal with in long-term effects. But on another aspect, I think culturally, there would be a lot of different ramifications if there was an event like that to happen in our community.
What are some potential warning signs for a student, or really anyone thinking of carrying out a school shooting?
That would be a hard one to say because there's lots of things. The thing is, when you look back historically from different crises like the Florida shooting, it's not one exact mold. So it's not, if you fit this mold, you're going to be this type of a person, or, if someone else fits this mold, they could be that way. In all reality, there's lots of different things, but it's not just one specific thing. But some of the things that you would look for is someone from withdrawing from people, not enjoying connection and interaction with other people, while at the same time, that can be a healthy thing as well for some people, is to distance themselves from others and whatnot. And so being distant, being overly intrigued and entertained with a culture of violence, I think that would be one that you would definitely want to be aware of. Having an obsession of weapons and mass destruction. There's been talk in the mental health fields of just having a kind of a mass shooting culture when people are just infatuated with these historical events and they study them and they're just intrigued by them and they just get completely consumed by learning all the little tiny details about these past experiences. But I think those would be some of the ones that I would be cautious about and be aware of.
Okay, so basically what we came up with as we were talking in the class is if you see something, say something. No matter if it's a small thing, like if they're just distancing themselves, if you see something, say something, because that could save a lot more people than if you didn't. Okay, next question. Are there things that students can do mentally to prepare for an emergency, ways that they can be more aware?
I think mentally what they can do is prepare by trusting their teachers, trusting the people that have jurisdiction over them. We have safety protocols. We have things in place, even though we know in the crisis it may not seem that that's the, I guess, safe, like most natural reaction is to follow instruction. It kind of seems very chaotic, and you kind of take your accountability into your own actions of how you feel you should react. And the thing is, we do encourage you to do what you feel would be safe, while at the same time trust the adults, trust those teachers, trust those faculty members, the law enforcement. If they ask you to do something, do it. So I think mentally preparing to say, hey, if my teacher tells me to stop running and walk, like I need to do that for a certain reason, for the safety of myself, for the safety of others. But being able to mentally prepare for that, I think, would be really hard, of course, just because when you have your heightened emotions and adrenaline and everything, it would be really hard to do that. But mentally preparing I would put trust in those adults that have that jurisdiction.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Now we'll move to the school. First question, what do students and teachers need to know about the likelihood of a school shooting?
Well, that's a great question, Haley. I think we're seeing more and more in our nation. Some of the numbers that are out right now, I think the last one I heard was 179 school shootings since 2002. Those numbers talk also include drive-by shootings, or if someone had a gun went off but no life was taken. I think we've moved to a time and place that we need to have in our minds that not if it will happen, but when, and prepare that way. I don't think we want to talk doomsday, but I think the last time we had students in a school die in a fire was 1958. After 1958, they put in the fire alarms, the fire suppression systems. Those were all required by law in schools, that we drill at least once a month on fire evacuation. Well, we're pretty good at that. And I see that happening with school safety. I think in our district here, all of our principals are required each year to do at least one evacuation and one lockdown. Most of our principals are doing at least one a month, some a little longer than that. But just the thought of thinking about it and preparing for it. If you're prepared, then you don't worry.
What should students do in a case of a shooting?
Well, let's go back to, you already made this statement once, and I hope everybody heard that and will look at that and take that into their lives. If you see something, say something. That could be as little as a student by themselves sitting in a hallway. They're mad, they're frustrated, they're pounding the floor. You could tell they're very irritated. It doesn't hurt to say something to a teacher. Hey, there's someone out in the hall there. It doesn't look good. They may not be a school shooter, but when Mr. Jones talked about mental health, there's someone who's struggling, not a mental illness maybe, but they're struggling with mental and emotional health at that point. So if we say something and get an adult involved, that's huge. For example, you walk around the building and you see a door propped open with a bag or a box or a backpack. Say something. So I'm so happy to hear you say, because that's what we have started training teachers in our district, in a couple of faculty meetings the last couple of months out at elementary schools. If you see something, say something.
If you don't mind, I'd like to chime in right there. That motivates you as the student to have empathy for someone else. You may not understand what they're going through, what may be going on, what they're thinking, but you care enough about that person that you want to give them help. I think empathy goes a long way. I would say the majority of the situations when you bring up something like that to the counseling office, we investigate, we find out, we help the student, and it may be something that was very small, but the fact that that student even knows that another student in the building cared, that goes a long way.
Also, and if you do see something, don't be scared to get them in trouble. The administration will just ask them a couple questions, and it's not going to do anything to them. Just say something because you'd rather save lives rather than be like, oh, I knew something was up, but I didn't say anything.
If I could just finish up with your question on school shooting, what should students do? Following the direction of the adult in the room. I know sometimes, and I've been in high school classrooms, junior high classrooms, we go into lockdown, it becomes now who can text who the quickest, and it's a little bit of a joke, and it's, why do we have to do this right now? Well, one of the reasons why is our teachers take their role at protecting students very seriously. When you come to school in the morning, our biggest goal is, and you think it's to teach students. Our first and main goal as teachers is to get you home to your families at the end of the day. If we're able to teach you math or science along the way, that's icing on the cake. But really our goal is to have you all day long and get you home to your parents safe and return you the way you came. And if we can teach along that way, that makes it better. And then Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and I know some of you are familiar with that. If you don't feel safe, it's pretty hard to learn. But if you feel safe, then you can learn. And I think that's one of the reasons why we practice the lockdowns, evacuations, is hopefully some students that may not feel safe can now feel safe. We have our basic three that we talk about in the district: lockdown, shelter in place, and evacuation. We don't want students, we want students to follow the direction of the teachers, but we've also encouraged teachers not to just hunker down and be like fish in a barrel, when someone comes through the door. There's things that you can do, and we've left that up to the classroom teacher. We've told classroom teachers, this is your domain. You know what you can do to keep this room safe. You know where to put kids to get them out of the way in a lockdown. You know what weapons, so to speak, with a stapler, a potted plant, whatever, to keep kids safe. So.
Awesome. And that brings back the point where lockdowns aren't a joke, because school shootings are becoming so common that if we start treating it as a joke and it's a real thing, we probably won't know what to do. So take it seriously. It may just be another drill, but take it seriously, just as seriously as a fire drill, because you never know what could happen. And you can answer this question or not. Have there been threats in our district?
Each time you get a threat, people have to take it and decide whether it's a legitimate threat right now, whether it's someone that's trying to, fire someone up. So we have threats of a bomb threat. I mean, you've probably been in schools where those have happened. We have protocols and policies set up for that. We have not had anyone that I'm aware of call and threaten to do a school shooting in our schools that I'm aware. I would think I would be aware, but I have not had, anyone say we're going to do harm to a school.
And that should make us students feel a lot safer. Are the resource officers armed in school, and are the administrators?
So Idaho law is that schools are gun-free campuses. Okay, Idaho has a concealed carry law, which is if you've got your concealed carry license, you can carry. We don't frisk every one of our teachers when they walk in the door. So I would say no. I don't know the answer to that, is the best way I can say. Our resource officers, as you all know, you walk up and see Officer Bovey, he's got a handgun on his waist. We have, the nice thing we have in our county, which is very helpful, is both our chief of police and our sheriff have asked their officers not to drive by a school. What I mean by that is if they're out patrolling or they're out going to a case, if it's not an emergency, if they drive by a school, they've been asked to come in, walk the halls, get familiar with students, get to know our students in our schools, spend some time in the elementary so our elementary kids aren't scared of policemen, so they understand that they're there to help us. And that's happened. That's been the last 2 years that's taken place, probably longer than that. But I appreciate that as I meet I meet regularly with our police chief, our sheriff, the hospital, the fire chief, and in those meetings, the only reason we meet is school safety. We talk about what's going to happen in the case of an emergency. Not just, when you talk school safety, you're not just talking an active shooter. That's what we're talking about now because it's in the media right now, but they talk about all kinds of school safety issues, from an active shooter to hazardous waste. There's all types of scenarios.
Of course, and that should give us another sense of safety, knowing that if a police is just driving around, he's going to come in and say hi. Another question, how come all of the doors aren't locked during school hour, and how do you protect the outside buildings?
Great question. That is constant battle in schools, because I think if you walk around this school, there's 110 exits and entrances, doors that can be open. So there's a lot of places that people can come and go. Most of them you'll find locked. I know some of the areas that are unlocked are areas that go to outbuildings, meaning your ag center, seminary, and so I know that we've spent some money trying to get those locking doors set up so that when the bell rings, the door unlocks. When the bell rings again, they lock up for the class period. We run into issues there where students put a rock in the door because I know I'm coming back in 15 minutes. I don't want to have to walk it's so far. I know.
So far.
So far, the miles around the front of the building. Which that's where, as students, you can have the buy-in and say, you know what, if I'm in seminary and I get called to the office, I know I'm going to have to walk around and I'm going to have to put on my big boy pants and do it.
Yeah. Is there plans for more security in the schools?
We're always looking. Every year we write a grant to the state of Idaho as a district for safe schools. There's money out there for safe and drug-free schools. We write every year for that grant. It's what's helped put in more cameras. It's helped with replacing locks throughout our school. We want, if there was an active shooter or something that caused an emergency in the school, it's pretty hard for a teacher to reach out and lock the door from the outside and get into lockdown. So we're trying in all of our schools to make sure teachers have an access to be able to have their door locked from the inside so they don't have to go out in the halls to lock a door. But you've probably seen around town at our elementary schools, speed signs that now flash at you if you're going faster than 20 and tell you to slow down. That money is used for those type of things. And then security cameras. We have, I'm sure you've probably wandered through this building and thought, why do we have so many security cameras? Well, what it does is if we were in an active shooter situation, law enforcement can be out at their trailer looking at the school and seeing what's going on in here. But also with Columbine, since Columbine, before Columbine they used to wait for a group of officers to come together and then they would go in. Now officers have been trained. First one here goes in and tries to eliminate the threat. Their real goal with law enforcement is first stop the killing, meaning stop the active shooter, and then address those that would be dying, injuries, get them prepared to go to the hospital. So yeah, we're constantly looking at ways to upgrade our security and keep everyone safe.
I'm sure. Okay, so last one. So you said that you work, or Mr. McBride says you work closely with the police, and any of you can answer this question. So how are you working with the police for like procedures and meetings, and like what would actually happen during this situation?
Good question, and you're right on the money as far as that is concerned. Training is going on constantly. Within the hospital, we have certain protocols where we'll go through active or shooting situations. We go through different scenarios in the hospital. Within the county, we have what we call the Local Emergency Preparedness Committee. And that is where we get together and we go through these kind of trainings as well. And we'll take those scenarios, we'll do what they call tabletops where we'll talk through a situation. And then we also have active on-site situations where we'll walk through those same things as well. And so we're actively communicating with our law enforcement, with our schools, so that we understand what's happening, understand all phases. Even though you can never outguess a lot of these things, we just try as many scenarios as we can so that we can understand it the best that we can. Yeah, good question.
And I can tell you that besides LEPC, we meet with Sheriff's Department, myself, Police Department, the Fire Chief, our resource officers, and talk about, we'll meet next week. Actually had a meeting scheduled for next week where we'll talk about the Florida shooting and see if we can learn ourselves from some of the things they're stubbing their toe on, some of the things that, didn't happen. And I think the worst thing we can do, learning from there, is point fingers and blame. Really the only person we should blame is the killer, the individual that went in to do harm. There's all kinds of people or groups and communities going, well, it's this person's fault or it's that person's fault or we need to have more of this or more of that. Well, at the end of the day, it was one person and we need to blame them, and then the rest of us need to learn from that experience and have our community come closer together, see something, say something, so that we don't have to go through the trauma they're going through.
Rather than walking around fearing the day and thinking that this person's going to be a school shooter, become interested in other people's lives. The thing is not to prevent a school shooting, but because you care about other people. But the more you become aware of other people and the more that you practice talking to a stranger, being kind, bringing up concerns to adults about somebody that you may see that's having a hard time, the more you actually practice caring, the more you're going to care. And I know that, that's a little bit of a spin off the practice, what we were talking about with being prepared for mental health, first aid and getting involved and whatnot. But the thing is as far as emotional and psychological concern, you can prepare for that as well. You can practice taking care of other people. You can practice just caring, and the more you do that, the easier it's going to be. And like I said, is not an aspect to prevent school shootings, but because you actually do care about your classmates.
Of course. In closing, do you guys have anything else that you guys would like to add?
I do. Can I just bring it up? And I don't want to make this into a whole issue. Obviously, this is a big area that we're dealing with right now. One big concern that we have at the hospital is this idea of mental health, illness in some areas there. Right now, currently, the hospital is seeing close to 1 to 2 patients per day that are coming into our ER that are either suicidal or had attempted suicide or have those tendencies or those issues that are going on. So this is very prevalent in our community, and we need to be aware of that. Also realize that many of those people who come in and get treated or those are because of somebody who was caring about them. They saw that there was a problem and they were able to assist and to help them to come and get some treatment or some help. So when you're saying see something, say something, that is so true and so important in all aspects. And I think it goes to, anything that we're dealing with here. So just be aware of that. Realize that it is prevalent in our community and we need to be aware of that.
Yep. And just because we do live in Rexburg doesn't mean that we are immune to anything. We live in a very reserved community. It's an awesome community, and I love Rexburg. But it's so sad hearing that 1 to 2 people go in because they're suicidal or have tried every day. That shouldn't be happening. We need, not saying that people are being rude to them, but we do need to be nicer and care for people and realize that if they are struggling, that we need to extend our hand to them even though they don't want our help sometimes. Any other remarks?
Let you know that as a district, we take each one of our students' safety seriously. Again, our goal is to get you home to your family at the end of the day. And when we do drill, it may not be in the optimum time, but know that we do it because we want what's best for our students and our staff.
Awesome, thank you.
I would just add that just because you may suffer from a mental illness doesn't mean that you're violent. And I
Of
think
course.
that's something to
Of course.
of course, the media spins a lot of different things, and just understanding that those that do struggle with mental illness aren't necessarily always having violent tendencies and everything. And so just being able to separate the issues. And I know that Mr. Lords did really good at talking about what we need to be addressing and what we need to be focusing on. But mental health, of course, is something that we do need to address as this community, as Mr. McBride pointed out. But just understanding that it's not necessarily mental health. It's not just a gun problem. It's a big problem. And
Of course.
there's lots of different aspects to it.
Of course. Very good point. We would like to thank Mr. McBride and Mr. Lords and Mr. Jones for their time and for the insight that they gave us in helping us students know that we are safe when we come to school and that we should be worried to a certain extent, but we shouldn't always be worried. Their goal is to keep us safe no matter what. So thank you guys for coming in. We really appreciate your time and for letting us students get to know you guys and what your guys' protocols are. And we also want a special thanks to the broadcast class here at Madison for allowing us to use their equipment and for all of the time that they do, and also the Bobcat Beat for what they do. And thank you to Mr. Barris and Mrs. Sanford for allowing this special occasion to happen. And that's all.